Hey again everyone, and welcome back to the channel for another installment in our ongoing new figure showcase series, where we're taking a quick look at a figure I'm adding into the collection. Most of the time that is going to be a new release, but there have been exceptions to that. So today we're going to continue on with the AUG Toys Dune line, and we're going to be taking a look at their Gurney Halleck figure. And Gurney is the Atreides Family War Master, played by Josh Brolin, who has taken on some incredible roles, right, like Thanos and Cable and so on. But I think he really did a great job here. So AUG Toys is releasing him in his Dune armor version from the first movie. So it's a great companion piece to the Duke Leto. So as is always the case, I will give you my opinion on the character. And as you probably know by now, I love Dune. Dune is probably my favorite book, followed closely by Dune Messiah and Children of Dune. So to see the adaptation brought to life the way it was really awesome. The world building that went into this is just amazing. For example, Gurney has that backstory that's just hinted at in the movie, where we know he suffered at the hands of House Harkonnen and Raban in particular, and that's why he trains Paul with such an intensity. It's a role that required someone able to capture that kind of intense nature and drive, not just to win at all costs, but to help his family survive as well. And I think Josh Brolin did a great job with that role. So look, I'll tell you, this is probably going to be a shorter video. If you watch the Duke Leto review, a lot of these items we're going to be discussing are pretty much identical. Actually, they are identical. So we'll just breeze through them. And looking at the figure, if you thought Leto was light with accessories, somehow Gurney is even lighter. The key difference is that Gurney doesn't include the binoculars. Otherwise, you get the same hands, same sword, and same base. So no variety at all. And I guess given that it's armor and it's kind of a uniform, you can almost forgive that since it's supposed to be very similar. But just preparing you for the fact that they're pretty much identical releases with the exception of the sculpt. So we'll look at the accessories again, but if you watch the other review, feel free to skip ahead. But looking at the hands, identical to the ones we got with Leto, with the same kind of great detailing on the armor, but variable level of detailing on things like the stitch work. Even the hands with the two figures pointing are identical to what we saw with Leto, so this is a straight reuse of parts. I would have expected maybe a slightly different hand, but it is what it is, and same issue here. These are way too stiff, so I know I'm going to have the same issues I had with Leto in terms of posing. Now, the small sword, once again, exactly what we saw with Leto. Same grip design and same exact blade and sheath. Now, the only thing I will say, this handle does look accurate to Gurney's blade. So for Gurney, there is that slight extra bit of accuracy. But you're not really going to notice these until you're actually really looking for it. So you can almost start to see why these two figures were released together. Shifting over to the base, it's the same story. It's 100% the same exact one, with the only difference being the nameplate at the front. But the size and the sand diorama is identical. Now, it really does feel like the Hot Toys Star Wars desert theme stands, with the same orientation of footprints on both. Look, it makes sense for Dune. It's a desert planet, and these are the armored looks for both characters, which we see on Dune, but it's just a reuse of parts here. So let's jump into the one thing that makes the figure truly different, which is the sculpt. For this one, I do think they did a great job. I can see Gurney here with a very decent sculpt. Again, the only thing that I think holds this back are the eyes. The paint is just a little lackluster in them. Otherwise, they did an incredible job with the details on the sculpt, from the slightly sunken cheeks, the wrinkles on the forehead with the slightly furrowed brow, which is very character appropriate, and on the right side of his face, he does have the big scar that's a nice detail. Paint is really good too. Not quite Hot Toys quality, but pretty decent, and I do think the hair and the detailing on the beard are very solid. So I think like with the Leto, there's a good likeness here that's only slightly betrayed by the paint on the eyes. Although there is a slight nick on the neck of mine due to the contact with the armor, it's barely noticeable, but do proceed with care with these. Now, the rest of the figure, in case you hadn't noticed, is also 100% identical to the Duke Leto. Same armor plating, same paint apps, same gray undersuit with the armor plate. It's on the knees, same boots. Actually, I take that back. There is one slight difference, and that's the rank on the collar. Gurney has a high rank, but it's not as full as what we saw with Leto, which makes sense. I'll give you a quick overview just in case you didn't see the Duke Leto review, but most of the points are going to be the same. Suit itself looks great and is a nice representation of what we saw on screen with the heavy armor and the very distinctive looking shoulder guards. Again, the way these are connected to the base figure are with elastic bands, and they're held in place with some Velcro connection to the sleeve, which does play a little havoc when posing. Along the front and back of the armor, you do also get some nice variable armor panels, including a more charcoal color one under his neck, and these brighter silver ones along the torso and his back, which serve to break up the slightly monochrome look. Again, there is pretty much no weathering on these, which, given that the armor hasn't seen action yet, makes sense. So I don't mind that pristine look. Oh, and one other thing I do like, the figure does include the personal shield controls on the wrist, and that's another nicely detailed component. So while I do have issues with the figure, I do want to give AUG Toys props for some good elements that they did a really good job with. So just like with Duke Leto, I have very similar issues here with Gurney. First and foremost, not the most posable of figures. With Leto, I could forgive it slightly, but Gurney I think would have benefited from some greater posability. But the big issue is the armor. With the legs, you can definitely bend the knees, but you're not really able to move the upper legs to create a lunging pose or similar, because you do hear the pressure on the hard plastic armor. This would have almost benefited from having some kind of a pivot point on the armor to let it fold up on itself or just fold out, similar to some of what Hot Toys does with the Iron Man armor panels. Granted, this isn't an Iron Man figure, so I don't expect that level of engineering, and it's not as expensive, but just something to allow for some posability would have helped. Similarly with the shoulder armor, it looks good, but it does restrict arm movement, and similar to the Leto, the shoulder armor has to be detached from the connection point on the sleeve, and also because of the harder material for the collar guards, it's very difficult to move the sculpt and rotate to have him look side to side. Now, Gurney does have a shorter beard, so there is slightly less interference, but again, do note that issue I had with the slight nicks on the neck of my figure due to the joint friction. The other thing you'll notice with this figure is that I had the same issue with the hand, so you'll need a heat gun to remove the pegs and to swap out hands, and also the gripping hand for the sword, it's just so rigid that you actually also need to use a heat gun here to loosen it slightly. But the biggest issue with mine, which is similar to what I had with Leto, the top of the hand, the slot for the sword is a slot, right? The fingers are molded together, and I think someone undersized these because it's too small to fit in the sword. So don't force the sword in unless you want to scratch up the hand and potentially the sword. So that's definitely a QC issue, at least in mine. Oh, and the other one you might think is a slight nitpick, but when you bend the arms, the sleeves pull up, which is fine, but they reveal the underlying body, and you can tell it's a standard body. The color of the skin looks very plastic and doesn't match the sculpt. But on the plus side, you can reposition the armor plates on the forearms to cover these, but just a bunch of little things. But overall, I think it's another solid effort from AUG Toys, but it really is identical to the Duke Leto, so do be aware of that when picking them up. AUG Toys basically just had to create two different sculpts, and that's it. So if you know that going in, I don't think you'll be disappointed with what you're getting, because it's a good looking figure, and if you're a fan of Dune, it's nice to have Gurney in the collection. So I am going to wrap up with a look at both figures in another video, and we'll talk price at that point, because that is another slight nitpick. But hopefully for now you've gotten a chance to see Gurney. So let me know your thoughts on this release, and let me know if you think my bias for Dune is resulting in me giving these figures too much of a pass. And as always, thanks for watching, and if you're enjoying the content, please consider dropping a like, comment, or subscribing, and we'll touch base on the next video.